Okay, Brian, do I have your consent to record this session before we get started?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. And I know that when we were talking over text, that we talked about this session could really focus on kind of I call it the wheel of life. I think you've called it the 360 dashboard, but is that still a good place for us to start today?
Yes.
Okay. Anything top of mind, 911, that's got you distracted or that we need to address before we get into that?
No, not before we get into that. I think, there's plenty of drilling down into that wheel of life that, there's nothing pressing right now. So,
Well, do you mind if I pray for us before we get started?
yeah, please go ahead.
Lord Jesus, I just thank you so much for Brian and his willingness to answer your call to be a pastor and to serve the kingdom in this way with his giftings and his whole being and heart and life. And Lord, I just thank you for the gift that he is to Wellspring and to the community, to his family and his friends. I just pray that our time together would be a blessing. And that it would be just that you would use me as a vessel to encourage Brian as he learns to leverage his strengths and look forward with intentionality towards his goals. I just pray that you would be present with us, and thank you again for this carved out time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I didn't send you the wheel of life picture, which I sometimes do, which just to give you an image, it's a circle. And I know you're an artist, so if you want to kind of even envision it this way, and I can send it to you later, but it's a circle. And on each of the kind of with spokes, and then each of the pie pieces is an area of your life representative. So it might be your health and wellness is one. And there are concentrically going out, there's lines where you can put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And if you're 10, you can imagine that wheel is perfect and it rolls, right? Your life is perfect. Well, probably never going to be a 10 for any of us, but we might have areas that are, more fulfilled at one time or another. So what I'd love to do as you kind of thought through those areas is have you tell me which area do you want to talk about first that feels top of mind? And then kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe where you feel like that is. And then let's kind of dig into the whys, or you can give me your top 3, however you want to do it.
Yeah. And so I mentioned before we start recording that I'm doing this for my pastoral review. And what they sent me was basically what you're talking about, the diagram. Right. So I'm guessing it's probably the same one.
Good.
So this is timely to go through this. As far as where to start, it's a great question. Let me scroll through here some of my notes. Well, let me say this. Maybe this is a good place to start, just in a general kind of overarching way. One thing I would like to work on is just goal setting in general. I think with the stage of where our church launched, it was not planned. It was kind of maybe emergency situation is not the best way to describe it, but I've used this analogy some with Brent, for reference, a counselor and my brother. But in some ways, it feels like a hurricane hit our world as a former church, and or in some ways, an analogy of just being dropped in a war zone, and you don't really have the luxury of a systemic 2-3 year plan. Like, we didn't start this church with a 3-year plan. We started it basically in like a 30-day window. And I think when I think about that, I think about myself as operating one in just an emergency, just kind of an emergency mindset of we've got to get this off the ground. We've got all these hurting people, and just the idea of an emergency tent set up in the middle of a community that's just had a tornado or hurricane blow through. So now that we're about a year, almost a year and a half into it, I feel like we're having to do some of the back work to think about, okay, what kind of church do we want to be? What kind of leader is God to be in this? What are, in some ways, God called me to do this, and I was there. He said, I'm calling you to do this. And we said, okay. And so there wasn't a lot to it more than that. It wasn't, here's my gifts, here's my plan. It was, God said, do this. There were a couple prophetic things, and we did it. And so now I think I want to work back and start to think about, okay, what areas are weaker that I need to surround myself with? What areas are strengths that I'm not operating in? Because, we've been like this in families too. Our families at times, like, I'm not operating maybe out of my perfect health because we're just in kind of crisis mode. I don't want to stay there. I don't want to live there forever. But I feel like that's where we've been the past couple of years. So I think part of this, of where to start for me, and what I was going to tell the elders in the pastoral review, is just, I just am now starting to feel like I can come up a little bit to catch my breath above water, to start thinking about some of these things that, the first year and a half was really just scrambling crisis mode. So this is very timely. As far as where to start on that wheel, I think wellness would probably be a good place, because in that crisis mode, one leading up to leaving the former church and starting this one, I was not, it was just a spiritually abusive situation. So I was not spiritually very healthy, which just led to emotional unhealth. I didn't take care of myself very well physically, because, when all those things are not healthy, that was just another place. So I think just evaluating spiritual, emotional, physical wellness is a good place to start. I've identified that, been working in those areas in different ways, sought counseling, have done some things physically as far as exercise and diet, and spiritually doing better. It's been some healing. So we can start there. As far as a number to put on that, I would probably say in general about a 5 or 6. All of those areas, when 2 years ago, those all would have been like a 2. So I there's a lot of healing still to go and room to grow, but that's kind of where I put that right now. I have some goals in those, but so I've seen a steady healing path in those things, but that would be the biggest, is just, if I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of the flock that God's given me. I can't take care of my family. I'm not being a steward of the temple that I am. So anyway, we can start there. I don't know what questions that brings. That's just kind of my general answer, is I'm somewhere around a 5 or 6 on a good trajectory. I think I feel like I am towards some better health in those areas.
Yeah. Well, obviously, having watched you in that journey, I think it just to commend you that you've been so intentional coming out of that woundedness to get counseling. I know the community that you've built. And so I think you're just so, you're already so proactive in doing things. So I think just commend you for that. And I think that it's great that you want to kind of shore up that foundation, because you're right. I mean, it's the thing that you're operating out of for everything else. And so I love that. And there's a lot in that wellness capacity. And so I think we'll break it down in a minute. But I also heard you say, just so you know, I heard that piece about you want to work on goal setting for the church too, and for yourself and what you need to accomplish, and, in order to be more operationally sound or get some of those things done, kind of thing. And so I think those are all goals that we can talk through. But I think based on what you're saying, just tell me if I'm hearing this right. Like, it would be helpful today if we walked through and unpacked that wellness piece a little bit and kind of broke it out maybe in spiritual, emotional, and physical. Does that sound right? Does that feel right?
Yep.
And if we ended today and, you're a 5 out of 10, I'm not suspecting that you're going to get to a 6 today or a 7 today, but what would feel like success to you of a session if we leave today and we've talked about these things?
I think one, just helping me think through what are some next steps. Yeah, I think if I came away from today with just a practical step in each area, would be helpful. And I think, yeah, kind of broader than that, one place I want to go to, one weakness I've identified, which is a personality weakness, but also a weakness in just the season of life our church is in, is I'm not very good at delegating. And so we can put that on the shelf for next session or whatever, but I just didn't want to forget that might tie in some of this. But I think that as I think about taking care of myself more, one way I can do that is to delegate more. But that's tricky because, one, I'm very idealistic, and I struggle to delegate because sometimes I have this mindset that it has to be a certain way. If it's not that way, it's not good enough, and that's a simple thought. But and the other piece is just having the luxury, in some ways, the space to delegate. Like, it's like we could never get ahead of the church enough to be able to properly delegate. When you're in crisis mode, it's when you need to delegate the most, and it's the hardest to delegate because my brain's so flooded. I can't really get out ahead to think through. So I would love for that to be a piece. But yeah, I think if even if that's next week, but I would love to come out of this session with some next steps in those areas. So I think, as well as we journey these next few weeks, I think on that wheel, the financial is very much tied into these three, and it's probably the red alert piece in our life right now, just this season. So at some time over the next couple sessions, I want to unpack that as well. That plays into these. So I wanted to bring those up in case we start hitting on this and it starts to open a can of worms into other areas. So those are kind of the two flashing dashboard lights in my life, leadership wise, is just kind of the financial season we're in, and the weakness of delegation as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I imagine, like you said, a lot of these will blend together as we talk about them because they overlap and affect each other. But it is good to know, like, okay, because we can work on these things of, okay, I want to have some structure around how we accomplish some goals in the church. I want to work on, and I would even say maybe not a weakness, but that you observe an observation in yourself is that you can sometimes have difficulty delegating. And so being able to kind of talk through not only the hows, but the whys of that, and also, and just some potential, like you said, solutions for it. And then I think the third, like you said, the finances, which I know affects your wellness and just your overall ability to function in the world. So I've got those down, and we'll keep those on the list. But I guess just to clarify, still good to go through like the spiritual, emotional, and physical. Yeah. All right. So you're a 5 out of 10 there. Let's, out of those three, spiritual, emotional, and physical, which one do you want to start with? Let's pick them apart a little bit.
Yeah, let's just start with the spiritual.
Okay.
Yeah, start there.
So why a 5 out of 10? Obviously spiritual abuse is pretty, that's a lot to heal from. So obviously that's,
Yeah, and it's hard. I guess if I lump those three together, wellness overall would be 5 or 6, but I think the spiritual side would be a little higher of the three. So maybe that's more of a 7.
Okay.
The reason why, coming out of that season, It's kind of hard to put a number on it because in those depths, in that hard season, just felt the closeness of Christ and community. So there's so many rich things. When I think about my spiritual health, there's a lot of markers, but I think for me, it's, am I desiring the Lord and the things that he calls us to, just kind of to be simplistic about it. So it may not, I don't measure things usually in like, um, however many straight days of a quiet time. I think that's important. I think that you kind of have to have consistency in some of that. But, for me, a good gauge of my heart spiritually goes back a lot to compassion. When I'm not doing well spiritually, I'm more short with people. I don't have compassion. My margin for others is very low. And so I think in this season, I think it's trending more healthy because, I just find myself being compassionate for the lost, compassionate for our flock. I desire to be around them, compassion for Aaron and our kids, of just wanting to invest in them spiritually, which tells me I'm more healthy spiritually because I feel like there's an overflow. Again, Christ was, near us during some of those dark times. But one thing that made me think about it as we got away on the vacation and just resting, and we were around some of the international staff, like I just found my heart like burdened for them, wanting to share with them, interact with them. And so that kind of, to me, was a marker of evangelism, others, centered. And that, I've had times where I haven't been.
Mhm.
When we moved out of Binghamton, I was burned out and wanted people to stop coming to my door,
Mhm.
uh, asking for things, and just feeling like I could not. Yeah, I just felt pressured on all fronts by people, and I was not getting away well. So I think, in general, spiritually, the health has increased. I think, one, getting out of the abusive situation. Two, there's been some more justifying things that have come out to say, yeah, we weren't crazy, and these people were acting in an abusive way. So there was
Mhm.
affirmation. So that's helped, to be out of the environment and to have affirmation, and then to just have, in some ways, just a new body of believers that we're walking with. And so, I mean, that's the markers I look at. I'd love to know if there are markers that you tend to use. I'd want to weigh myself up against those, but that's traditionally some markers I look at. It's like, do I have a heart for the lost and the poor and those who are hurting? And, so that's kind of always a good marker for me spiritually.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like you just said. I mean, I think you're sounds like you're in a good place and trending in a good way. And I absolutely love your markers, because I think they're not focused on a checklist, which isn't the objective, right? I think I would imagine, and that there are certain behaviors, habits, rhythms that you find coincide when you are in this sevenish place, when you are feeling like you have a heart for the lost. So I'd love to hear from you. What are those things? What are those rhythms that you notice that are kind of in check and moving well, that facilitate this, right? Or that go along with it?
Yeah, I may not understand your question totally, or answer it properly, but I mean, it's, I hate to say it's the reverse, but when I'm not at a healthier place, it's like I don't want to be around people. Um, the compassion meter's low. You know, in my job, I have to do certain things, but I'm kind of doing it out of past knowledge and training and not out of a heart. So, I could sit down with someone in the body and have a discipleship time or shepherding meeting, and I can say maybe all the right things or default back to experience or whatever. But my heart doesn't want to meet with them. So, I think as far as what makes it a 7 instead of a 3 or whatever is, I think the fruit is just, it's a reverse of what I see myself drawn towards and doing as opposed to when I'm in an impaired place. Um, Patience, long suffering with people, not being as agitated, not as hurried. For me, it's I think so. Some particular specific markers would be: am I able to be slowing in my schedule?
Mm,
Uh, I'm not at the best when I'm packed to the margin and everything. For me, just I've often thought about David in the field with the sheep. Like, I need time to sit under the stars and think about the Lord. And I don't do it very much handwritten, but just to think about the Lord and write things, in some ways, some Psalms about who the Lord is. And so there's something for me practically about space, margin, being in nature, that makes me come alive. Like, if I'm usually not trending healthier if I'm not outside and having blocks of uninterrupted time to think, which seems at times maybe wasteful or slacking, but like for me, that's where my cup is, my Gethsemane, I guess, best way to say it. So a good marker is, am I doing that? It's easier for me to do that outside of Memphis. I think one practical thing you can help me with and write down is, like, what are those places around here? So when we're at Laguna with the students, the beach is a big, or is a real area that I come alive in nature. Obviously on family vacation, there are a lot of beautiful places so I felt that. I think sometimes here I have trouble finding that here.
mm,
And I think some of that's just geographically, it's not like living in, East Tennessee or the beach. But so I think place matters for me. And I have trouble finding it here. Sometimes being here, I have trouble feeling like I'm detached enough. I could go to Shelby Farms, it's beautiful, but my heart doesn't relax maybe like it would if I'm an hour and a half away, at a cabin or something. So I think I'm rambling, but there are places. Place means a lot. I have trouble a bit getting away here, but that's a marker for me. And I think just time in the Word is another marker. Again, I'm not very legalistic about it, but there's something about a routine of, just spending big chunks of time in the Word. I do not love preaching. I've grown to love it more, but I really love the preparation of sermon prep.
mm.
And I don't really separate, like, this is my personal time with the Lord and this is corporate sermon prep. I'm like, to me, because I want to be an overflow of my heart, I just kind of treat it all the same. Like, this is time with the Lord. If I have 2-3 hours a day to put into a sermon, I'm not feeling like that doesn't count for my quiet time or whatever.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
time with the Word. I love it. So some weeks, it looks different, but so those bulk times where I can have 2-3 hours of uninterrupted time are just really rich. So that's probably the two most for me right now.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, those would
yeah.
be two. I don't know. Did I answer that
Yeah,
correctly?
that was, yeah, perfectly. And what I heard just is that, um, you need margin. And that space, it sounds like, not only like in the daily, but that like in some sense of chunk too, right? So that, because, when in the daily, it's like, oh, it's just extra room to like, debrief from the day or talk to family. But the bigger picture of a margin is, set aside time, intentional time to be in an environment that allows you to be who you are. And I think, I just want to encourage you, it's not wasteful.
Yeah.
um, and I think that at their core, and I'm not surprised that place matters. I think, especially as an artist, the surroundings kind of, move you, and into the heart of God. But I think, so I think we should think about those for a minute. and I would break them out maybe into 3 chunks, but like, so your normal weekly margin, like your daily, weekly grind, like what margin could look like there. What would it look like to, I think you said it, find a space that emulates what you need, that's not, so out of reach that you can only see it once a year. But it could kind of become your spot, or places like that. And then and in that, what would it look like for you to free yourself up to put that actually into your schedule, to have like the bigger chunk? And that could be used for probably both of the things you mentioned, which is extended time in the Word and just space in nature or whatever. So sorry about that. I don't know if you heard that big noise. Okay. So I think out of those, if we talk about like margin in the daily rhythm, bigger set aside chunk of margin, and a specific space, which one of those you want to tackle first?
Yeah, the space will be, we can start there with the space. Yeah, it's been a little difficult. Well, during the school year, our house is kind of a refuge. It's, with summer, the kids are here, so it's harder to detach. So I guess I don't feel that need as much during the school year, during the average week or average day, to break away. Place does matter. So I'll go to Shelby Farm some. So it's probably not a weekly need. It's probably like a monthly, probably something small monthly, and then quarterly something, or twice a year, something a little larger. So my backpacking trip that I usually go on in January, with Brent, that's a great time to start of the new year. I hate the cold. It's warmer down where we go backpacking. So that's become one of my 2 or 3 times a year bigger getaways, and then usually a family vacation as well. The monthly, I've just always struggled with it. Some is because I don't mean this mean, but I just don't really love the geography of Memphis.
Yeah.
It's very flat. It's some of the stuff that you would go to, or Shelby Farm's just crowded. So I don't know. I've never been able to crack that. I don't know that there's an answer. Probably the closest I got to that was I used to go out to a cabin that now is not owned by the same people. I used to go out there about once a month, and that, or every other month, and that was helpful. It's about an hour away, so you didn't waste half a day just getting there. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's something that's always on my radar. I don't know what that would be. But that was a place where you kind of, Brent and I talk about this. He has a friend that he goes backpacking with. It's about a 30-minute hike to get to wherever the trailhead is, and they walk their railroad tracks. And he's like, they kind of let that walk to the railroad tracks, or through the railroad tracks, kind of let go of some things. So I think something that's 30, 45 minutes away, hour away, like you can kind of decompress, and then when you get there, you can really be at a different place. So I don't have a lot more detail on that, other than finding something in that 30-minute to an hour range that could get me out in nature, like that cabin, was very, very good for me. So I just got to figure that out. But
is scheduling an obstacle too?
No, it's not as much. I feel the freedom in my schedule to build around that. I mean, there's some, I feel like if I went away on a random Thursday, I could find somebody to figure out picking up the kids. Now that they're all at Houston, that'll look even a little different with Olivia driving them. But I feel work-wise like I'm given that space to go and connect with the Lord. It's really more just finding, a place that's accessible, that I don't have to always, like, it would be a real blessing for somebody to say, hey, here's the code or the key. You go whenever. You can just text me that you're coming. And yeah, I've got a place I go, but I'll always kind of feel like I'm bothering the person, or, something that it's not always accessible. It's like maybe once or twice a year I'll go fishing. Fishing's a big, something I love, just doing that. That brings me a lot of life. So in an ideal world, if I could find somewhere that someone would just give me an open invitation to, whatever day, I could even schedule it, like, yeah, once a month on this Thursday, I'm always going to go. So it's just finding that, asking for that, helping, people helping me think through who might have access to something like that would want to provide that space. But it's not a time, or, it's more of just not knowing where that place exists. So, which I had, and I've experienced that in the past, but that doesn't exist right now that I know of. So,
Okay, well, that sounds like something that, like, I'd love to, I mean, when we talk about like something to chew on, and especially as you're sitting down with the elders, I think that's a really clear thing that you can communicate as a need. It sounds like, I know I have the freedom from you guys, elders, to have this time. I feel that freedom. And I feel like I have, this maybe January backpacking trip, maybe a spring break and a summer. I have enough of those bigger things built in, but the monthly thing, I'm gonna aim to set that aside of time. I really need to figure out where. And
yeah,
and maybe even, Brian, I don't know, but since we live in the same city, I'm gonna think about it too. But because I was even thinking in my head, like, art museums, the botanic gardens, there's places here in Memphis that are not your traditional outdoors, but
yeah,
they can be beautiful and inspiring, or even just places that you could, that evoke newness. Like sometimes on a time when I have to do homework or work, I'm going to go and sit at a coffee shop in Crosstown because I don't ever go there. And so sometimes they can just evoke newness. So
yeah,
even to be creative and come up with a list. I mean, sometimes I see those things on Facebook where people are like, where in Memphis would you go if you want to do this? Like, to poll some people and find out. So I think that should be something that we work on, is figuring out spots for you to try
yeah. No, that's good, because
and put it on your calendar.
there is something about the creative mind in me that I enjoy exploring a little bit. I like the pattern of something fixed, but it is fun to just, that'd be a good homework for me to find, 4 or 5 new places that I could try over the next few months, to just, something about it being new is, I like that wording. That's good.
Yeah. And even I think about like the University of Memphis library. I mean, or a bigger library. Like sometimes, sometimes they can have rooms and spaces. You're like, I didn't know this existed. So, I think, ask people, make a short list to try. And like you said, I do know that you like that rhythm of a familiar place. And so, but maybe you find a new familiar place, or maybe in lieu of that, you at least get, like I said, that burst of
Yeah.
beauty and inspiration. But I'd love to see you carve that out on a monthly basis. And like between now and the end of the year, you could do that 5 times and look back and go, what impact did that make? Right. And did I find a place?
No, it's always kind of the hunt of my heart to find that place. And then when I've found them at times, and then for whatever reason, some of those get taken away or
Yeah.
removed. Possible. And so, and I think too, some of it's the idealism of, a coffee shop that's new to me, may not be the ultimate 10 that a day fishing might be, but it's still life-giving, and it still
Yeah.
produces more than just being at the house. And so I need to, sometimes I probably have this mentality of like, well, if it's not this, then I'm not going to do any of it. It's going to be so, or it's not worth the time when it really is. So, yeah, that's good advice. I would like to create that.
Okay. So maybe the homework can be, that you got August, September, October, November. So maybe you can pick 5 Thursdays or whatever it's going to be, put them on the calendar, and cultivate a little bit of a list and then just try 5 places. And see. I think you're right. I think that it won't be your fishing hole, but it'll move you towards something, right? And then maybe you do find that next place, who knows? But
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so I'm tempted to maybe move on to the emotional or physical, but is there anything else in the spiritual that you feel like we need to kind of think through?
No, I mean, I think that when I really drill down into it, I mean, there's probably other things I need to do, but I think, well, I will add this. I think that having something that's a little bit more regimented in sharing my faith. I was in a meeting yesterday, a church planting cohort, and the guy that was talking he was talking about how their former church used to help, I guess, seed or help incubate new church plants. And one of their requirements was just that whoever they were providing seed money to, there were some basic, I guess, parameters for sharing their faith. Had to, have 5 conversations a week, which is a lot. I don't know if that's necessarily doable. Because it was, yeah. So that they're talking about a church planter that moved to a new city and doesn't know anybody. So most of their day is full of getting to know people. And I'm like, well, we have a flock that's known. Like, to find 5 people I don't know per week and share with them, that's a lot.
Yeah.
My mind, maybe it's not to some, but I think there's something about I'd love to see our congregation have a little bit more of an initiative that we craft too. But just personally, I think finding a way to systematically go share. So maybe it's on these Thursdays,
Yeah.
sharing into wherever I go. So
I love that idea. I love that idea. Yeah. So, and, I think that, so I think incorporating it there, but I also think that, I love kind of what you said about a regimented way. I know what you're saying. And I was, again, because we're in the same body, I was even thinking about, who happens to be my daughter, is coming back from project and had evangelism training all summer and got really motivated to share her faith, like in your body, being able to introduce that through stories like that, and having, and Emily share about how that's changed for her, just as you pass it on. But even like, I think the other thing and you kind of said this, it's hard for me to meet 5 people. And so I think it's also like, where are you currently walking in life that you're already going to touch them? And you said that with finding the monthly place, but where else also? And I would imagine that's Houston High School. Like, you don't have as much interaction at high school anymore, but it's those just the places you're naturally walking. And if you're not naturally walking there, then you're right. Like we have to kind of change where we walk a little.
Yeah. And a lot of that was kind of it was provided through coaching baseball, that a lot of those gospel conversations came with players and parents and some of that. So now that's not in my world. Yeah, there's some connection with Houston, going to events like the track season. Of course, that was Riverdale, but I found that was a great place to really have conversations about a lot of different people from different schools, and so events like that are great. And I've asked myself too, because some of the requirement for this church was that they had to have conversations with men, and I didn't ask, or they didn't unpack why. I'm guessing it's just maybe the thought of, that if you reach the guy, then maybe that's more of a doorway into the home, or I don't know. He didn't really explain why, but I've often wondered, like, where are the men in the community? Like, where do they? Because I'm not going to just probably walk up to a woman alone and share with her. I guess if the Spirit prompted in a public way, there might be a scenario of that. But just starting to identify, like, where do I where do I frequent
Mm,
where other men are? And that could be tough, because a lot of men can recluse and be kind of, pull in from work, go inside, and so and not ever interact. And so it's how to mine that out. So I don't know. I just need to put some thought into that of what are the
yeah.
rhythm of other guys. Is that a gym? Is that
Mm,
uh,
I was thinking that too.
what is that? That's
Yeah.
always been a bit of an enigma. I'm kind of at the age where I'm like, I'm not going to join a basketball team, but maybe that's pickleball. We had a great time last night. Maybe there's some of that. So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a great thing to think about. And we don't have to solve that today, obviously, but I think it's good to kind of be thinking about that. I think it's a mindset too, right? When you're going, you're like, if you're not thinking about it, then you could be in lots of places to share, the grocery store, but you don't. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, so, um, so we won't have time to get into other areas, but what I do want to ask you, because I am aware that you, in this realm of spiritual and specifically related to your past wound, I am aware you have a meeting coming up that's kind of impactful next week, I think, right?
Yeah, it's not scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah, when we talked, I had told them, it's I would like to meet. I've got some things I want to, I've processed this for a year, and some things came to light, and there hasn't been, you know, an apology or an attempt to reach out to former staff and say, hey, y'all were right, we were wrong, and we're
Right.
sorry. So I initiated that and told them, the earliest I could meet would be, this next week. We
Mhm.
don't have a schedule. We talked before our family vacation, and I talked one-on-one with one of the new elders. He was very gracious. Said he's happy to meet. Aaron and I could meet with him. So it's at this point, it's just I've got to get it scheduled, which I will. But yeah, I anticipate that happening sometime before the 1st of August.
Um,
Yeah.
I know that's kind of tied into all of this, because I know that, when you talk about the spiritual abuse that you kind of endured and healing from that when we encounter those things again, they can kind of resurface things. And so I just want to say that, one, I'll be praying for it, but two, if in preparation for that meeting or after that meeting, if you want to help, use coaching to prepare for it or debrief from it, like that's space we can do that too. So at any time you can let me know.
That'd be good to put as part of maybe our next coaching meeting could be walking through um, just an outline for that. I think in general, I know be brief here, but I don't have a lot of expectations on
Mm,
that. I don't, part of me for a long time was like, I just want to wash my hands of it, move on. If the Lord stirs their heart to repent, I'm here to reconcile, to talk. And one, it was just too raw and didn't want to stir stuff up, didn't want to be divisive. But I had a couple situations around town where I ran into former elders and didn't feel like I could speak to them. More information came out. And so more than anything, I just felt like this is how I want to close that chapter
mm,
of to it, I think some advice I got from counselor was, maybe not pursue anything unless it directly impacted our body. And I don't really want to stir up stuff and it impacts the view of our congregation. But I felt like there was enough. The justice part of me is like, there's some new information that's come out. I'm not in a good place. And it's kind of my last attempt to just tell them that. They may not care. I don't really have much, expectations on how they will respond. I think there are some new elders that may respond well, and I care about that former congregation. And some advice I got was like, you're not the shepherd of that congregation. You're not the police of what they do or not. So I'm really trying to stay somewhat detached and just say, look, this was an offense. I'm a brother offended. I've tried to come before. Now I'm coming after. There's more information. Do with it what you want. If you don't, if this doesn't stir your heart to repent, then I'll wash my hands and move on. But that's kind of me closing the book. So we'll see. I don't have a lot of expectations on that. It's more, I'm doing it more for me than to produce some end product. I just really want to get it off my chest and just say, look, y'all have more information now. You've not really followed up with former staff, and I think you should. If you truly you're saying you want to be a church that pursues the Lord, and there was some discussion in the statement they read that mentioned former staff. So I was like, well, if you really are wanting to honor former staff and you mentioned them, then let's really unpack that a little deeper, because what you said in the statement is a good start, but that's a half measure. So I'm just trying to speak. You brought it up. I'm a former staff. This is my thoughts on the statement you made. So that was the genesis of it. So we can unpack it some more, but there has been a conversation with a new elder that is trying to help me bridge a conversation to some of the former elders and just see how that happens. We'll see.
Okay. Well, let know that I'm available for that. And I think the only question as you ponder and process and start to kind of get that organized in your head that came to mind is, if the purpose is really for closure for you, and maybe a sense of responsibility, like you said, to the body that you shepherded for so long and care about, which is, I think, okay to feel that way, obviously, but what would closure look like, with having low expectations because you don't know what you'll get back? I think maybe even the question is closure speaking your, feelings, regardless of the expectations, because you don't know what they'll be. So I think just to be thinking about that.
And that, yeah, I've asked myself that question. That's kind of where I land right now, is I don't have expectations, because in some ways, even to ask for a meeting, it's kind of like if you ask for forgiveness or you ask for repentance, they say, well, I'm sorry. Like, does that really count when you're the one that spawned that conversation? So I think a mark of repentance would be obvious. I think if they said, yeah, our hearts are really repentant, then I would ask for some specific practical measures of that instead of just verbal. But I think the goal of the meeting for me is just to really verbally say what I want to say. So that's the only expectation I have, is hopefully for them to hear. And I'm going to do that even if they don't pursue a meeting. I'll write a letter. So I'm gonna get that off my heart to them, either in writing. I wanted to do it in person because writing is one way, and so this was
I love that.
for back and forth. And maybe it leads to something, maybe it doesn't. So
I love that. So when do you meet with the elders of Wellspring
Monday.
for your pastoral review? Monday? Okay. So as you think about the other areas, because we didn't get to tackle a ton, obviously, because there's a lot of depth there. What, in the last few minutes, what would help you prepare for that meeting Monday? In a condensed version, right? Because we talked about one area in depth, but what would help you to have the tracks to run on?
I don't know. I mean, some of this is it's just helpful that it's the same areas. I mean, I don't know, because I don't exactly know how they will. I mean, we're going to go over each area. I don't know really what their responses will be. I think one thing I felt like is I'm going to give them a number in each area and have, a summary of each area. And then there's some additional things I was going to ask of them, which one would be the kind of the question of how do you live as a co-leader, shoulder to shoulder with me? Like, how do you experience me as a leader? Is probably. Then the other would be to say, okay, I think it's important for me to go through this process, this wheel diagram or a wheel of life or 360 view, and I think it's important probably for the elder team to go through something similar, because in the past I've seen things like this, like, it matters. I mean, it matters, how I, rate those things and where I'm at, but, I'm a part of a ecosystem there. So it, like, I'm tied to their, so, we've seen if the elders are unhealthy, then that could make me unhealthy. If I'm unhealthy, that can breed unhealthy in them. So I think it's more than, I think they're doing it to care for me and to examine, my role as a pastor. But I think I want to present them with, all right, well, let's look at all of these things for you guys too, because we're all intertwined.
Hmm.
And then I haven't mentioned that to him yet, but that was sparked out of, I felt like we need to do kind of a similar dashboard health of our congregation this fall, and we go away on a retreat of just, what are some markers or some benchmarks of a healthy community, and where do we feel like we're, at as a church. And so I think I didn't want to be just very minuscule examination of me. I wanted to broaden it to the elders and the broader body, because we're all kind of intertwined there in play together. So that was one piece. Yeah, so I don't know that I need a lot of help preparing for that. It's more just writing a little summary on each of those. I think the work will be, once I hear their view on some of that and reactions to that, like, let's unpack what they responded with versus what my view of it was. So, if I say, this section of my life is a 5, and they're like, well, we think it's a 3, or we're
Yeah.
7, they think it's a 3. Well, let's talk through why, and then let me unpack that with you.
Yeah.
That
And
would
I
be the,
think I offered this, I said this to, I guess, I don't know if it was to Chad via and then Grant, but, and you may have heard it, I don't know, but I mean, I said that part of this coaching process oftentimes can have an implementation of a 360 review, where like I can spend time, with each of like a Grant and a Brian and a Chad for an hour to with a set of questions that you would also be answering about yourself, but that they are able to speak into. And then what happens in that is that it depersonalizes and de-identifies the information, and it finds the threads. Like, I don't give you all of the information back, right? But I collate it into a report and say to you, hey, Brian, the top 3 things I'm seeing are this. But then you also get to have, typically, and I just did this on myself this year, just so you know, I didn't do it myself, but I mean, had it done. And and your children can respond, your wife can respond, your brother, whoever you can pick. It's supposed to be that full view. And then you do a self-assessment. And what I find that it gives is then in the relationship of a coach, and in your close people, you get to process that information and really, leverage the strengths and the things you see that you're winning in, and then look at those opportunities that are in a consolidated view. So I'm happy to do that. We can talk about it if you want, but that's something that I hear you kind of saying you want to hear their perspective. Sometimes the most authentic version you get of that is when you get it outside of you just sitting in front of them, not because it's human nature to want to protect you too. So
no, I agree. Yeah, so that'd be great. Yeah.
You talk about that with them and see if that's something they want to do. And I think that you'll be able to obviously rate yourself and whatever, but I think also hopefully it'll be an encouragement to them too, that you have this carved out space to say, okay, now you guys have made me kind of think through this wheel. I want to take each of these sections and really talk through how to set, some objectives around it too. And we can do that in coaching. So.
And when I mentioned to, Chad already knew, but when I mentioned to Grant that we were doing this, he was very excited because he felt like this was a needed part of that process. Kind of a step 2 to whatever we do Monday. So this is great that we're already doing it.
Okay, good. Well, okay. So homework, I think we agreed, right? That you'd set your monthly little, monthly getaways, and find some new places to try. And then I think with that, being even mindful, even while you're in those spaces, if there's an opportunity to be sharing your faith or, and paying attention to, where else you can share your faith. And I think, other than that, I think if you're good with it, we'll come back to the wheel.
Yep.
Next time and be able to talk about your experience on Monday, and talk about the wheel. And then we can also, I've got it, like I said, I've got it kept in mind that we're also need to kind of circle back to the church goal thing and the delegation, which, so we'll keep those on our list, and we can kind of, as the need arises, we can flex and see what you need. But, and then, and I know for the purposes of this, we said we'd meet 3 times, but like I've said to you before, we can keep going. I'm not tied to that. So, there's a lot of stuff in here that you don't want to rush and unpack. And so we can
Yeah.
just, it's up to your discretion, but, I'll reach out to you after this and give you, some dates and times so we can meet again. And, but you know where to find me in between.
Thanks. This is great. Thanks so much. I feel, just blessed to have you invest in me this way. I appreciate it.
I love spending time with you too. So thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. We'll
Bye.
see you. Thanks, Brian.